Just how hard is med school? This is an extremely common question that we see come up all the time in our work at BeMo, and so I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about what to expect if you get accepted. First, hi, my name is Dr. Sarah Klebe. I'm an admissions expert with BeMo Academic Consulting. So, you've gotten in, congrats, awesome, now what can you expect? So starting off, I'll tell you a little bit of a personal story and then show you how this connects. The trajectory is a bit different between graduate school and medical school, but there are a lot of similarities in terms of the kinds of hurdles that you have to overcome, the kinds of practices you need to get used to, and particularly in terms of the difference between this level of education and those prior. So for myself, I went the grad school route. I'm a doctor, but I'm a PhD doctor, so I did undergrad, master's degree, PhD. And if you're going to medical school, then it's likely that you have completed or will be very soon completing an undergraduate degree. And so if you've gone through undergrad, then you know how fundamentally different this educational experience is from high school, say. And it's likely that when you completed high school, you felt very accomplished, and you were, and you probably thought that you knew a lot about the world or the things that you studied, and you did, and you probably felt like you were fully prepared to continue your education at university, which maybe not. That is a point that I'll come back to in a little bit. Now, sort of building on that, it's likely that once you got into university, you arrived, you started going to classes, you probably had a pretty considerable awakening. If you're anything like me, you went from brimming with confidence to feeling utterly overwhelmed. The academic experience is so fundamentally different from one context to the next. I know when I first started my undergrad after graduating high school, I very quickly found out not just how much I knew, but how much I didn't know. I discovered a lot more known unknowns, which is to say I started to know enough to realize how much I didn't know. And moreover, I realized that there's also a lot that I didn't know that I didn't know, which is to say, not only did I discover these new known unknowns, I knew enough to know what I didn't know, I also had a lot of unknown unknowns, which is I realized that there are a whole bunch of things out there that not only do I not know about them, I didn't even know that I should or could know about them, because I didn't realize that that level of analysis, that depth of engagement or research even existed yet, because of course I hadn't completed the necessary education to help that become more accessible to me. And this can be a rather intense experience of acclimation. A lot of first-year university students go through this. But once you sort of adjust to it, you realize how different the expectations are and all that. And then you're usually able to reorient yourself and find new ways of learning and grow to appreciate the nuances of the particular educational context in which you're now working. And so then you are probably at the point where you're starting to finish up your undergrad and getting ready to move on to the next step. And again, for myself, as I was leaving undergrad, just like in high school, I felt very accomplished, and I was, and I thought I knew a lot about the world and my discipline, and I did, and I felt fully prepared to continue my education at the graduate level. And again, maybe not. Just as going from high school to undergrad, when I got to grad school, there was a considerable awakening again. I again went from brimming with confidence to feeling totally overwhelmed. I had to go through that whole reorientation experience all over again. Graduate school was as different from undergrad as undergrad was from high school. And so again, I was in a context where the extent of the detail and nuance necessary to really appreciate the full scope of knowledge was at a level that I wasn't really prepared for at the time. And it again took me some time to sort of regain my balance, find that even ground, and learn to succeed. And, you know, again, I went the MA to PhD route, but the same sort of experience often takes place going from undergrad into medical school or any professional school. You have to relearn how to learn, how to think, how to analyze. You have to develop tools to learn, to study, to incorporate and internalize knowledge and then apply it in useful ways with tools that you could never have previously imagined. It is a fundamentally different type of learning. So there isn't really any way to sugarcoat this. Medical school is hard. It's very hard. It's hard in terms of the sheer, amount of content that you have to internalize and assimilate, but it's also hard in that there are just new ways of learning that you didn't previously need to have, really, because that's not the level at which you were learning previously. So we go through these sort of stages of acclimating to a learning experience, grasping it, understanding it, feeling confident, and then taking the next step and sort of starting all over again. Except we're not starting all over again. We've got some foundation of knowledge, and that's the whole point of these different levels of schooling, is that the top in one area is the bottom of the next area, so that you have to keep incrementally growing and improving. So when you get to medical school, the sheer volume of information that you're going to have to recall, the sheer amount of detail that you're going to need to incorporate is incredibly intense. The subject matter itself is complex beyond what you thought possible previously. Sometimes the ways that you're tested might feel unfair, or there might be standards that you'll have to reach that will feel unattainable. There's just so much that you need to know and learn in such a compressed amount of time. But again, this is normal. I don't say this to defeat you or to make you feel like this is hopeless. This is just what the process is. And I wish that I had had someone telling me when I was going through my higher education that feeling of being overwhelmed, of feeling like I didn't have steady ground, was completely normal. That's just what the process is. So it's okay. If you can know that it exists and anticipate it, it makes it a little easier to manage. That way you don't feel like you're somehow behind everyone else or something like that. No, you're right where you're supposed to be. However, just when you think that you've learned everything that there is to know in a particular topic, you will come to the realization that actually the subject can be broken down into even smaller parts, parts that you, again, previously didn't even know existed. And that's intense, and it can be very frustrating and stressful to deal with. However, at the same time, realizing how much you still have to learn is a humbling lesson to go through, right? The sheer vastness of knowledge and information in the world, let alone in just a singular discipline, is really difficult to conceptualize. And so this gives us, I think, a real appreciation for all of the various specializations that exist, both in the discipline that we're studying ourselves, let alone the multitudes of other disciplines out there. This allows us to, I think, get a little bit better perspective on not just our own work, but the work of scholars in all of the various disciplines through sciences, humanities, social sciences, all of that. As complex as all of these things are in our own realm, they are equally complex to other disciplines in their own realms, and that really, I think, again, gives us a deeper appreciation for just the vast amount of scholarship that exists and the kinds of things that people have devoted their lives to. So I like to think of that as an important and humbling sort of lesson. Do be prepared, though, that these years of medical school will be the most difficult years of your life up until that point, until you get to residency, and then those will be the most difficult years of your life. That's, again, just how the process goes. You are going to have sleepless nights. You are going to be wishing that you had more time just to get everything done. That's something, again, that many of us can identify with. I remember for several years, my mantra was, if only there were only 28 hours in a day. I feel like if I had those extra 4 hours every day, I could get everything done that I needed to get done, but alas, that is not how the solar system works. It's going to be tiring. It's going to be daunting. You're going to have bad days. You're going to feel like you're pushed to your limits sometimes. You're going to spend hours sometimes on a single concept just trying to understand it and apply it effectively. But that process helps develop you into the kind of pragmatic thinker that you need to be to practice medicine. That's the goal, right? It's not like the professors and the organizers of the discipline don't know that this is very difficult and strenuous and stressful, and not everyone makes it through. They know that. But part of the point of putting you through that rigor is so that you'll be able to develop the skills and the analytic abilities necessary to be successful in the field after you've completed your education. So, at this point, your study tactics are going to have to change. You can't just memorize and regurgitate information anymore. You can't cram the way that you can in undergrad. You have to really learn material and apply it and be able to give and justify reasons for your application in that particular way. But for every anxiety-filled moment of studying, there is a reward. This level of education will be unlike anything you've ever experienced, possibly unlike anything you ever could have imagined. Again, my own journey similarly. I didn't even know that the kinds of thoughts that I engaged had been thought before. It's a whole new way of thinking, of reasoning, of seeing the world and your place in it, of seeing others, of seeing the practice of medicine as a whole. There's going to be all kinds of things that come up that you don't anticipate, that you can't anticipate, but you will also then grow in ways you never thought you could ever grow as a person and as a professional. You'll start meeting patients, and they're going to impact your lives in ways that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Empathy will take on an entirely new meaning by the time you graduate, and if you're lucky, your classmates, the people in your cohort, will become like a second family to you. You'll see the world and the world of medicine in a completely different light and have a whole new appreciation for the field, and again for the fields of others who are laboring in similar ways towards different ends in different disciplines. But you'll ultimately remember why you got into this discipline in the first place, and all those worries about the demands of medical school will eventually fall to the side. Your passion for medicine will outweigh how hard you perceived it to be. And remember, at this level, this isn't just about a career. That's important too. This isn't just about what you want to do. It's about who you want to be. Right? You're working towards a profession where, in many ways, your profession is also part of your identity. So you need to think of this not just as an educational experience. It's absolutely an educational experience, and it has worth on its own just as an educational experience, but it's also a broader human experience of becoming. That human journey that we all go through, And you're going to have the opportunity to do it in a way that not a lot of people can, right? We know very many people apply to medical school and don't get in, and of course there are multitudes who don't even apply. They choose to go other directions with their education or their job or career or both. But at this level of schooling, it's not just about school anymore. It's about you and your journey. So with that said, with all of those warnings and alarm bells, let me give you some tips to survive medical school. These are just a few concepts that tend to impact people who successfully complete medical school. They're tough lessons, but they are necessary lessons. Some of them might seem a little simplistic. Maybe you think you have them mastered right now, but remember what I said at the outset, there are a wealth of known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and you'll encounter a lot of the latter, and in that process, you're going to learn sometimes that the way that you've been studying probably isn't going to cut it. You're going to need to make some adjustments. The way you've been living your day-to-day life might not be sufficient anymore. You're going to have to make some adjustments. So with that said, here are 3 of our best tips on surviving medical school. So, number 1, you need to figure out how to study in that context and figure it out early. You may think, well, I've completed or I'm about to complete an undergraduate degree. Obviously, I know how to study. Well, not necessarily. Undergrad largely teaches you how to cram, how to pull all-nighters, but it doesn't necessarily prepare you for how much and how quickly you're going to have to gather and retain information in medical school. You can't just cram that information in and regurgitate it onto a multiple choice test or exam anymore. That doesn't cut it. You need to learn to adapt to this kind of learning, and doing that can take time. So figure it out as soon as you can, as early as you can. Try different study techniques, look for some advice, go to your on-campus resources that exist to help students develop good study habits given the discipline or context in which they're working. And remember, you're paying for those services with your tuition, whether you use them or not. So make sure that you're fully maximizing the money that you're investing into your own education and putting into the institution by making use of all of those resources available to you. A lot of people recommend, or a lot of doctors recommend, trying group study. Even though many are rather averse to this, it's actually very effective when you're working in a group. You have to explain things out loud to others. That sheer act of explaining out loud helps retention. And also teaching or helping others learn is a very effective method of learning. Some of the greatest learning experiences that I've had, in my perspective, have been times when I was teaching. So that's incredibly helpful. And as well, a practical sort of connection to that is that practicing speaking out loud in a group will help you improve your pronunciation of complex medical jargon and things like that. But ultimately, being able to understand the material effectively and fully enough to explain it to a classmate is really, really effective. But in any case, whatever you end up working with, don't be afraid to try new study techniques. I know you've probably got habits, and maybe some of them will carry over and will continue working, but some of them might not. So experiment with this a little bit. You never know what's going to work until you try it. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, take notes, but live by a rule that if you write something down, you have to read it and return to it later. At this stage, you simply can't write down everything that you come across. I know in undergrad, the tendency tends to be to try to get down every single word that comes out of a professor or teaching assistant's mouth, and there's just going to be so much information coming at you that you need to learn to prioritize that information and effectively summarize it. So again, a new rule. If you take a note, that means that it is important and that you have to read it again later. If you're taking notes just to appear busy, or if you're just kind of absent-mindedly jotting things down, that's not really going to be to your benefit, especially if you don't actually return to it. So taking some time to come back to whatever you've written to make sure that you understand it is an effective way of retaining that information. And just sort of a side note that I wanted to add here, I know it's most common now for students to take notes on their laptops or their tablets, and I want to strongly recommend that you consider, if at all possible, handwriting your notes. There have actually been a lot of studies done in the past few years that show that we recall information much more effectively when we've written it by hand. This means that, first we have a more sort of close physical connection to the words that we write when we're writing them by hand. And it's also slower than typing, which sounds like it would be a drawback, but actually what that means is that if you're writing notes by hand, you have to actively summarize, paraphrase, and synthesize information to get everything important on record. And when you're doing those things, you're actively and already sort of translating that material into your own language, which means you're internalizing it and processing it as well. So again, I know that it's much faster to type, but faster isn't always better. So handwriting will allow you to have a physical connection to your notes. It will force you to summarize, paraphrase, and synthesize. And now you'll know that if you've written it down, it's worth coming back to later. So, instead of maybe typing your notes and handwriting them out later, handwriting out the important points, do the reverse. Handwrite them first so that you're getting that synthesis, and then if you need to, organize them by typing them up in your computer and putting them together however makes sense for you. And tip number 3, you need to manage your time, and you need to do it really effectively. You need to prioritize what you need to learn and set a deadline by which you have to learn it. If there's a subject that you're struggling with, allow yourself a little bit more time for that. Again, you simply can't cram the way that you can in undergrad. Every single thing, every concept that you learn will build on another. Pathology and physiology have roots in biochemistry and pharmacology. Everything is intertwined. So set a designated study time for each subject and stick with it. Don't read Robbins and forget to read Dubins, right? It can be really easy to become engrossed in a subject that you're really passionate about and ignore something that you don't care so much about, but you need to be disciplined. You have to tear yourself away from those things and make time to study the things that you don't really want to. It's all about striking balance. So I appreciate very deeply the desire to pursue only those aspects about which we are most passionate, but that's just not going to cut it. You can't just learn bits and pieces here. You have to learn all of this information and balance it and bring it together to make sure that you're really getting the most out of the process so that you can be successful as you continue down this path. So this is a long journey, medical school, but it is worth it. Be the best that you can at every step along the way. Prepare early and adapt if you find that things aren't working out. Don't be afraid to reassess what you're doing and change it if you have to. Just because you've been doing something a certain way all this time doesn't mean that that's always going to be the best way. Doesn't mean that every tactic is suitable for every context. You may have to do some restructuring of your basic foundations, but that's okay, right? Remember, the top in one stage of education is the bottom of the next stage. So if the foundations that you got at the top of that last stage aren't enough to sustain the bottom and then the top of the next stage, that's totally normal. Restructure, construct a new foundation, play around with it, figure out what works best for you, and by all means, talk to specialists who can give you advice on how to do this effectively. Ultimately, getting into med school is going to be the hardest thing that you ever have to do until you actually get into med school. And then that's going to be eclipsed in just a few short days, and you're going to find yourself longing for the simpler times of undergrad. Believe it or not, there is a time coming where all the things that you're doing right now or that you've just completed are going to seem easy in retrospect. But that's also awesome, right? Every step of your journey down the path of medicine is going to feel the hardest while you're experiencing it. And in that moment, it is the most difficult thing that you've gone through. Just as the next step is going to be even harder than that, and the next step is going to be even harder than that. But all of that hard work just makes the reward, the payoff at the end, all the sweeter. So, I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that it was helpful. If so, please do go ahead, like it, share it with a friend who may benefit from it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, and look for us on a variety of other social media platforms. Do feel free to comment below with any questions that you might have. If you'd like us to help you, click the link to our main website that should appear either above or below this video and click Get Started Now to see all of our programs and schedule a free consultation. We'll set you up with one of our admissions experts to answer any questions you might have and to get you started on your preparations. We have programs to suit any of your needs, and we are happy to work with you to determine which plan is going to support you most effectively. As ever, thank you so very much for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.